Welcome. I'm Leslie Nips of Convivium Constellations, and welcome back to my video series on the Orders of Love from Family Constellations work founded by Bert Hellinger. And we're in video number 4 today. It is part B on the Order of Love with respect to seniority, contribution, and role. In part A, I explored this topic, this order of love, in families. And today I'd like to take a look at some other contexts: organizations, businesses, clubs, sports teams, neighborhoods, all the ways in which people get together. I'd like to take a look at this order of love, which has a lot to do with authority, who's in charge, who gets to make decisions about what, who has to do what. It's a really important order of love that help the basic functioning of organizations. Now, in families, I focused on seniority because seniority it's the most important part of kind of who leads families, who's biggest, where life flows down from the ancestors to us and to our children. But in organizations, this is a little bit more complicated. In addition to seniority, which is very important, who came first, we even recognize that, say, in how people get raises and stuff like that. We need to add in role and contribution. So let's just move right into an example. Imagine the business, and you have a janitor who's been there 20 years. She's done a great job, well valued, but there's a new CEO only a few weeks along. Does that mean the janitor gets more decision making than the CEO? Well, no. And how do we make that claim? It's because decision making is based on a complex interplay between seniority and role, CEO, janitor, whatever the role might be, and finally contribution. So two people, say two colleagues, same amount of time, same role, but one of them is doing more, is more competent, then that person ought to get compensated better, ought to have more say in the system, generally speaking. So all of these things go into contributing to who has authority and how decision-making takes place in organizations. And when we ignore these, when we ignore the interplay between seniority, between contribution and role, then systems can begin to get stuck. Let me offer up an example from my past life in the church world. I used to be a church pastor. So imagine you have a church that's been around a long time with a lot of members who have been there a long time, who've done a lot of work on behalf of the church. They have a lot of seniority. And you have the new pastor come in, and he or she does not have much seniority, but that person, that new pastor, does have the role, and the buck stops with them. They're the ones who can get fired. They're the ones who will have to explain if things don't go well. However, when the new pastor comes in, it's always a really good idea to spend time with the folks who've been there a really long time. Find out their ideas, their experience, their preferences. Not to do it their way, but so that as a pastor, you're acknowledging that seniority has some weight as well, and they're the new person. And then imagine that a new member shows up. They haven't been there a long time, but they start helping out with something and they do a really good job. Again, people can get their feathers ruffled about this sort of thing. This is a complex situation where we are balancing seniority and contribution and role. And you have to hold them in a sort of a complex dance so that good decision making and healthy community can emerge from the motley crew that shows up for any organization or workplace. Now, in the constellation world, I want to say that there are, in some corners, some misunderstandings about this. In families, again, seniority pretty much weighs much heavier than contribution or role. Contribution role are relevant, but they're not nearly as strong as seniority is. Whereas in non-family contexts, those three things, seniority, contribution, and role, are all in a very similar space. And sometimes this is misunderstood. If seniority was the only thing that mattered, then the janitor in our example would get to run things. The person who had been there longest, even if they were starting to get sick or addled or distracted, they'd still be in charge. In organizations, we have a different set of standards by which we attend to these different criteria for decision making. The good news is that we're not completely lost. We don't have to kind of make it up, although there is some creativity involved, because there is a guidepost for us, which is the group's or organization's mission. So let me give you one more example. Imagine you're on a sports team. Let's say the Boston Red Sox or the Yankees. And it's understood. What's the mission? It's to win the World Series, right? And so competence, for instance, is going to end up being a much more important criteria than seniority in who gets to play first base, right? But if you're in your local pickup team, or it's just about a group of people having fun connecting, or you're at a family reunion, you may choose the person who's been around the longest rather than worrying too much about who's best at it, because there's a different mission for the game of baseball that day. Yeah, it's more about building community, making connections, having fun. If organizations are really clear about their missions and everyone in the group shares that mission, which is why mission clarity is so important, then balancing these three different aspects of the order of love with respect to seniority, role, and contribution can be figured out. Again, it's with respect to the mission of the group, the organization that everyone is in. And then there's a good chance that we can have a healthier, happier organization that's doing its work more effectively in a way that feels transparent, where people know what the rules are and know what their place is. And there's something in systems, people do like to feel their place, their proper place in the system. So thank you for listening to this video on the part B of the third order of love, with respect to seniority, role, and contribution. If you have any questions or comments or shares from your own life, I really appreciate that on my blog. And please stay tuned for the next one, the fifth video on the fourth order of love, which is about the balance of giving and taking.